We're at the last section of our book. It's very well possible that we will finish tonight. And if you have a book you would like to hear read for our new book, please let me know. You can uh, put it in the chat box. You can send it to Smyrna 1844 at Gmail, and I'll get it. But right now we're going to finish up that Book in the Attic by Helen K. Oswald. And we're starting a new chapter. Remember, she was having a hard time at the college she was at. Maybe a few, maybe one student in particular made fun of her old, not ragged, maybe really old, but clean clothing and shoes that were worn out, but people stepped in and helped her with her clothing. But now we're going to pick up with a chapter that is entitled My Visit Home. I wrote letters home regularly, although I never received a reply. Father always saw to it that he called for the mail, and he did not let the rest of the family know he had heard from me. Mother and my brothers and sisters were worrying about where I might be. Sister Katie happened to be in town one day, and so she called for the mail. To her surprise, the postmaster handed her a letter from me. She answered it right away and got it in the mail before she returned home. How happy I was! I answered it immediately, but Father received my reply and knew from it that Katie had written me. Whereupon he wrote a very strong letter informing me that my name was erased from the family record. I was no longer to call myself a member of his family. He asked me not to write home again. Katie waited for some time for an answer. When it failed to come, she thought Father might be keeping letters from her. She wrote again and asked me to address her in care of a neighbor, and I was glad for this suggestion. Now I could keep in touch with her and with other members of the family. These letters helped to break the awful loneliness I felt at times during the 4 years that elapsed before I saw my family again. Father seemed to have bad luck in whatever he undertook, and one accident after another befell the family. One autumn day, my 16-year-old sister Lydia was working in a cornfield when some hunters came by and shot into the field. The whole charge struck in her face, and she lost both of her eyes. This was a terrible blow to the family. She was sad and despondent. She suffered intense pain for months. She often asked our parents to let me come home that I might talk to her, but Father denied her that privilege. One day Father became ill. The doctor told him he had better set his house in order, for death might call at any time. He was quiet for some time. Mother saw he was having a real battle about something. Finally, he called her to the bed and said, "Maybe we had better let Helen come home." Sister Katie hurried to send the message for me to come. I took the first train home and arrived late the next night. Good old Fido was the first to greet me. He knew me and barked and danced with delight. After petting him, I walked up to the house and knocked. Mother came to the door. After greetings were over, she took me to Father's room. By the time I reached home, he was so much better that he was not so eager to see me as he had been. He feared I might influence members of the family to follow in my footsteps, and so he was cold toward me. I sat down beside his bed, however, and talked to him and stroked his toil-worn hands for a while. I loved him, even if he had treated me roughly. Then I went upstairs. After I'd greeted the other members of the family, Mother took me to my blind sister's room. It was almost more than I could bear to see what a terrible calamity had come to my youngest sister and how it had changed her. She cried bitterly when she put her arms around my neck and said, "I can never see you again in this world." I got into the bed with her and we visited until near morning. I told her what a comfort this blessed truth had been to me. She said, "I often thought there really must be something in the Adventist message because you were willing to go through so much in order to live it. I often asked the folks to let me come home so that I could talk to you, but it took until now." I told her about the blessed hope of our Lord's return and other points of our faith. Her heart began to reach out for Jesus to come into her life. Things went along well until the next forenoon when our rough neighbor and my cousin John arrived. The minute the neighbor saw me, he started trouble. He made many threatening remarks, and I listened to him for a while. I would have taken all this abuse had it come from a member of my own family, but I thought it was cowardly to sit and take it from him. He had no right to say anything, and I finally said, "Sir, do you know that we live in a land of religious liberty?" At this the man flew into a rage and said he just ached to lay his hands on me. John called to him, "Old fellow, you better keep your hands off of her and to yourself. Just one slap may take your whole farm." This made him angry at Cousin John, and he started on him. After arguing with John a while, he left him and came back to me. It seemed the only way he could get his revenge was to point to the large family record that hung in the living room. Gritting his teeth, he pointed to the record and said, "Now to whose family do you belong? And who will give you property when you get married?" Then he laughed loudly. When I looked at the record and saw my name crossed out with black ink, a strange feeling came over me. I turned about and looked at Father. He was looking down. I said, "Father, it's quite all right. I love you anyway, and I'm still your flesh and blood, even if my name is crossed out of the family record." Let me sing just one stanza of the song I often sing as a prayer. "Lord, I care not for riches, neither silver nor gold. I would make sure of heaven, I would enter the fold. In the book of thy kingdom with its pages so fair, tell me, Jesus, my Savior, is my name written there?" When I turned about, the neighbor was gone. Mother said he put his hands over his ears and ran out when I began to sing, and I was glad he was gone. When Father noticed that all my brothers and sisters gathered closely around me, he said, "You'd better go back to school, Helen. I'm afraid your Adventist influence around here is not for the upbuilding of this house. You'd better go." I knew I must obey, for Father always meant what he said. As I looked around, everyone stood quietly, and my blind sister began to cry. My heart ached for the poor girl. She could hardly bear the terrible darkness into which she had been plunged. She knew her life would indeed be dreary, and she longed for spiritual sight that would pierce the dark future. I took her by the hand and went upstairs. I quickly read Isaiah 35 to her. She rejoiced especially over verses 3 through 6 and 10. Strengthen ye the weak hands, and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion, with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. I kissed her goodbye and assured her that I would make a real effort to get her into school for the blind. Then I hurried downstairs and said goodbye to the others. Dear old Grandpa was there now. He slipped a few dollars into my hand, and as he bade me goodbye, he said, bless you. As I went out the door, I begged once more that my parents be sure to send Lydia to the school for the blind, but they did not feel that they could let her go away from home in her sad condition. My eldest sister was married soon after the visit. I just want to go back to dear old Grandpa. He slipped a few dollars into Helen's hand as he bade her goodbye, and she said, bless his heart. And now I'll go back. My eldest sister was married soon after this visit, and Lydia went to stay with her. Together we made arrangements to send her to the school for the blind in Gary, South Dakota. She took music and learned to play many hymns, which proved a real comfort to her. She learned to knit, crochet, weave rugs, and read and write in Braille. She often said after she took her stand for the truth, even though I am blind, yet this truth forms a ray of light that shines through to the end of time. Her favorite song, Lead Kindly Light. After leaving college, I entered the nurse's training course. I worked in a doctor's office for some time after becoming a graduate nurse. Then I accepted a call from the South Dakota Conference to help in an evangelistic series of tent meetings in that state. I joined some of the very people who had held the tent meetings in my hometown years before. Once more I saw the organ the persecutors had to buy for the ministers. What a privilege it was to fill the same place in a series of tent meetings that those dear people filled at the time when my heart was drawn to God. We located in a wicked town. Attendance at the effort was good, but we received threats all the while. It was a terribly hot summer with no rain for weeks. A man who claimed he was God lived in that community. He kept telling the people that he would not let a drop of rain fall until that idol temple of our tent was burned down. He had many friends possessed of the same spirit as he. The young man who was tent master for us had to be on guard all the while, but in spite of his watchfulness, our tent burned one night with the organ, songbooks, seats, and everything. The minister who was leading the meetings was a man of courage, so the next morning he and the young tent master went uptown and rented the town hall, where we continued the meetings. The summer passed, and not a drop of rain came until after our tent was burned. People kept teasing this man who claimed he was God, saying, "You said you would give rain after the idol temple was burned. Where is your rain?" Mr. Oswald, the tent master, now you're getting a clue, and I became friends during those meetings and carried on correspondence after he returned to college. During the school year, I had the pleasant task of being matron at South Dakota Academy. In the summer, Mr. Oswald and I were together in another series of meetings. In the fall, I returned to my work in the doctor's office. During the winter, my brother Leonard accepted the truth and came to live with me. We rented a room and did light housekeeping. We greatly enjoyed being together. In the spring, Mr. Oswald and I were married. The leading minister had been assigned to a foreign mission field, so my husband had to take the leadership of the meetings, which started 5 days after our wedding. Our wedding trip consisted of a long trek across the country by team and wagon to the place where the meetings were to be conducted. While I was still attending college, and soon after my visit home, Father became discouraged, very discouraged, because of all the accidents and calamities that seemed to be following him. So he sold the home and moved to Canada, hoping that things would be better in a new country. Moving from the prairies of South Dakota into a heavily timbered section of Alberta was indeed a change for Father and Mother. They found that clearing timber was almost harder work than removing stones from their South Dakota land. However, the whole family got under the load, and before many months passed, a number of fields were ready for planting. There was much other hard work in starting the new farm, as only those can understand who have done it. A new house and other buildings were to be built. Some of the smaller buildings were made from logs, but the house, a comfortable 2-story building, was erected from good lumber. The bad luck and the heartaches of the former home were somewhat forgotten. Lydia returned home after spending a number of years at Gary. In spite of her blindness, she was now able to play and sing and to work with her hands. She spread much sunshine in the home. About 4 o'clock one cold morning, Mother was awakened by the smell of smoke, which seemed to be filling the room. She quickly aroused the family, and they barely escaped with their lives. Father tried to get a few things out before the flames enveloped them, but his efforts were in vain. He was the last one to get out of the burning building. As he ran out the door, he heard something drop and felt it fall against his heels. He looked around to see what it might be and was surprised to find his Bible following him. He picked it up, held it under his arms as they stood there that dark, cold night, watching the flames consume their comfortable home. Father wrote to me the next day and told about the fire that had destroyed their home. He said the only thing we saved besides ourselves was the Bible you sent me for my birthday a few years ago. Just why this Bible followed me, I do not know. I kept it on a little shelf near the door. When I left the house, it fell right out after me. I sent my parents a telegram as soon as I received the letter and assured them that Leonard and I would send money at once. Leonard had some money saved, and I had some due me from nursing. Together we got a good check to send. In the letter that accompanied it, we told our parents that we were also sending a box by express. We gathered together everything we could spare and obtained some things from neighbors and friends to put in the box. It contained almost everything from quilts, blankets, and pillows to kitchen utensils. Father wrote and expressed appreciation for the help. In conclusion, he said, "I only wish I could have saved my watch. I feel lost without it." Later, Leonard and I managed to buy him a good watch, which pleased him greatly. The house was insured, and my parents had no trouble getting it rebuilt. One day the neighbors for miles around came with teams and helped get the lumber and build the new house. With many hands, the work went quickly, and soon they had a good home again. The spring work started shortly thereafter, and Leonard went home to help put in a big crop. God blessed it, and it looked as if it would yield 100-fold. Near harvest time, Leonard wrote, "We expect to start harvesting a heavy crop in a few days. Father is sick, and Mother is overworked. Pack your grip, bring your babies," I had 2 small children at this time, "and come out and help Mother during harvesting and threshing. We will help with the fair." I was happy for the opportunity of seeing my parents again. We arrived in the evening. Father was suffering severely from rheumatism, so I put the children to bed and made ready to treat his swollen knees and ankles. As I proceeded with the treatment, he said, "This makes me think of the time years ago when I was bedfast for weeks with this same trouble, and you took care of me at night." I was glad he hadn't forgotten our previous companionship. In the morning, he told me that the treatments relieved him so much that he had had the first good night's rest in 3 weeks. After breakfast, he became acquainted with his new grandchildren and took a real liking to them. They recited their memory verses and sang their little Sabbath school songs, which he enjoyed. He responded well to the treatments and was soon able to be out and help with some of the work. By the time threshing started, he was himself again and did much of the heavy work. In the middle of the afternoon of the first day of threshing, I said, "Mother, I'm going to fix some sliced peaches with cream and a glass of lemonade and a few cookies to take out to Father," and she cheerfully consented. When I arrived with the lunch, he gladly took it and sat down on the side of the wagon box to rest while he ate. I tried to shovel off some of the wheat for him, but I had not done any work of that kind for some years. Consequently, my muscles were not equal to the heavy task. Father laughed at my efforts. After he finished the lunch, he handed me the dishes with the words, "Thank you, my child. That was refreshing." It seemed so good to hear Father address me as his child again, that I couldn't hold back the tears. "What's wrong?" Mother asked when I reached the house. "Nothing is wrong, Mother," I replied. "I can see that everything's going to be all right now." Father called me his child once more, as he used to before I became an Adventist. Yes, said Mother, the old family record on which your name was crossed out was burned with the house. Now we can make a new one. On it your name shall be written in letters of gold, because you had to break the hard soil all alone years ago. Had you not been faithful to God's calling, we might all be in darkness now. As it is, most of us are on the road toward the kingdom with you. I hope, too, that I can soon keep the Sabbath and be baptized. Only those who have experienced the thrill of seeing an answer to prayer that has ascended up for years can know the joy that filled my heart at that moment. Mother and I both shed tears of happiness. One noon, Father said, I will not be home for supper with the crew. I plan to take 2 or 3 loads of grain to the elevator in order to get some cash to pay our help when they get through threshing. It was some time after dark when his last load was taken to the elevator. He received $84.75 for his wheat. The 75 cents change he put in his overalls pocket. The $84 was all paper money, which he rolled up, intending to put it in a trousers pocket underneath his overalls. But he happened to put it between the overalls and his trousers. Fortunately, he got on his wagon immediately and drove home. When he reached home, the gate to the yard was closed. He jumped off and opened the gate, then drove in and took care of his team. The tired threshers had all gone to rest by this time. Father was very tired too, so he ate a bit of supper and went to bed. The next morning they began threshing very early, so they could get through by noon. Mother, Lydia, and my children and I were the only ones at home. The old dog was lying by the gate, sunning himself. As they ran down there to play with him, the children found Father's roll of money. They, of course, did not know what it was. They liked very much to cut out pictures, so when they saw all those faces, they decided to come to the house and cut them out. My little girl picked up her dress, forming a basket, and her brother gathered all the green pictures, as they called them, and filled the basket. Then they started toward the house. After giving me the flowers they had picked on the way, they asked for the scissors. What do you want them for? I inquired. Oh, we found lots of pictures by the gate, they told me, and we want to cut them out. Where are the pictures? I asked. My little girl then dropped her dress and out rolled various denominations of bills. Mother and I could not understand why they should have found all that money at the gate as they said they did. We counted $76 when we heard Father enter all exhausted. He had noticed his money was gone and had hurried home to see if it might have fallen out in the bedroom when he undressed the night before. When he saw the money, he said, "Oh, I am so glad I lost it in the house. How much have you?" We gave him the amount. But, Grandpa, my little boy broke in, we found that at the gate. Father was amazed and said, I must have put it between my pockets. Evidently it dropped out when I jumped off the wagon to open up the gate last night. I wonder where the rest is. I had $84. We all hurried to the place where the children said they had found the money. After searching a while, Father found $2 more near the stream that ran through a corner of the yard near the gate. Because there was a strong northwest wind blowing, Father thought the rest had been blown into the stream and carried away. We were glad that at least $78 of this hard-earned money was recovered. After Father was gone, the children and I went back to see if we could possibly find some more. We found $4 at the edge of the water, caught on some weeds. As a reward, Father gave each of the children $2 and also bought a new cap for the boy and new shoes for the little girl. After threshing was finished, we got ready to start home. Mother was not feeling well the day we left, so Father took us to the train alone. When we said goodbye, he put a new bill in my hand. He clasped his grandchildren tightly as the train pulled up to the station. Soon we were seated in the coach. Dear old Father stood by the window. He reached out and held on to the hand I reached out. He tried to smile as the children kept saying, "Goodbye, Grandpa, I love you." Soon the conductor called, "All aboard." Father looked up at us once more and said goodbye. His eyes were filled with tears. Somehow I felt he wanted to say something that was on his heart, but he couldn't. The latter part of January that winter, I received a letter from Mother. "I have taken my stand for the truth and have begun the new year right." Also, 2 of the younger boys are taking their stand with me. Father is very much displeased and is talking some of leaving home. He has threatened to take Reuben, the youngest boy, with him so that he will not become an Adventist also. She closed by saying, "Pray that God will not permit this to happen, for I could not stand to have my baby boy taken from me." Thinking that he would be happier alone than with his family, who were keeping the Sabbath, Father left home one morning. He was gone about 3 days. Then he returned to pack a few things. "Where are you going?" Mother asked, as he put some bedding, dishes, and other household furnishings on the wagon. "I've bought a place about 9 miles from here," he answered. "It is way out in the woods where no Adventist will be around. Get Reuben's clothes ready, for I'm going to take him along." "I don't want to go with Father," Reuben cried. "Oh, but you must if Father tells you to," Mother comforted him. Much against her desire, she packed his clothes, feeling sure that Father would not stay away long. She also packed a big box of food for them. What a sad picture. Father driving away with a few pieces of furniture and the youngest child on the wagon. After they had been gone a number of days, Mother baked a batch of cookies and some fresh bread. "I think I'll take some cookies and bread to Father if I can find him," she said. "I shall also cook some food I know he especially likes." With the food and 3 of the boys, Mother drove away into the woods to find Father's new home. They had a hard time finding it because there was hardly a road leading into the woods where he lived. Reuben cried for joy when he saw his mother and brothers. "I've been so lonesome," he cried. Father was lonely too, but he would not admit it to them. Week after week passed, and he remained on his place. About twice a week, Mother would send over supplies of food and clean clothes. She and other members of the family begged him to come home, but he refused. Life finally became so monotonous for him that he decided to take a trip. He and Reuben traveled to the eastern part of the U.S., hoping to find contentment, but they knew no one anywhere and were very lonely because Reuben was so homesick, and because they found Adventists in the East also. They returned after a few weeks' absence. The second day of Father's homeward trip, a minister boarded the train. He saw that Father appeared sad and lonely. After watching him, he decided to join Father and visit with him. He stepped over and introduced himself. Father at once made room for him to sit down. The minister opened the conversation by saying, "I see, sir, that you are rather sad, and that you are traveling alone with the boy. I take it for granted that your wife is either sick or in the hospital or dead." Father was rather touched by his sympathetic remarks, and tears came to his eyes. The minister felt sure the boy's mother must have died, and he tried to give comfort. Finally, Father said, "I have lost not only my wife, but also most of my children." The minister was almost taken off his feet. "Tell me what great calamity has come to you," he begged. "A number of years ago," Father said, "the Seventh-day Adventists came to our hometown and sowed their seed. As a result, one of my children became a Jew, and one after another of the family members of my family began to take up with their doctrines until my wife has begun to keep the Sabbath." "That surely is unfortunate," the minister said. "Those Adventists should all be imprisoned or sent to some island where they cannot spread their propaganda. They're nothing more than false prophets. If they want church members so much, why don't they go out and convert the heathen? Instead, they insist on going about breaking up the peace in our churches." Turning to Father, the minister said, "By the way, what church do you belong to?" "None at the present," Father answered. Surprised, the minister said, "May I ask why?" "Because none of the denominations live up to the Bible," Father retorted. They contended for a while, the minister claiming they did, and Father trying to prove they didn't. Indignant, the minister exclaimed, "I am not at all surprised that your family joined those crooked Adventists. You are not straight yourself." By this time, Father was getting angry, and he pointed a finger at the minister and said, "You may call the Adventists crooked, but let me tell you, they are straighter than other churches are, including yours. At least they live what they preach, and they have Bible proof for most of it." At this, the minister rose and went to the smoker. A passenger who sat in the seat just ahead of Father had overheard their argument. This man turned about and took up the conversation with Father. "I listened to your conversation, sir," he said. "It was interesting indeed. I think you have much for which to be thankful in having your family turn to religion. I would thank God 1,000 times if my family had any inclination to serve God, but they despise religion." Here he paused for a moment and breathed a deep sigh. "My wife," he proceeded, "became interested in things outside the family when the children were small, which proved a detriment to our home. She was gone for hours, and the children were left unsupervised, often until the late hours of the night. No one knew where she was. I was out on the road much of the time, as I am now, to make a living for my family. Therefore, I could not spend much time with the children and care for them. As a result, my oldest son, who was a very dear boy when small, is now in the penitentiary." Tears began to roll down his careworn face as he continued. My oldest girl made a shipwreck of her life and is following in her mother's footsteps. The two younger ones, a boy and a girl, are staying with relatives. Life has been hard to endure these last few years. I just came back from visiting my son at the penitentiary. He has been there over 2 years. He is despondent and begs me to get him out, but I'm helpless, for I cannot, no matter how much he pleads and weeps. Don't feel unhappy if your family becomes Seventh-day Adventist. They are good, honest people. I know them well. Father could see that he truly was blessed, but he had not considered it before. He tried to speak comfort to his sad seatmate, but the man left him. But before he did, Father said, "Yes, I guess I really should be thankful, for I have a good, faithful wife. We reared 9 boys and 4 girls, not one of whom smokes or drinks or plays cards. 2 of my daughters married good, honest farmers. One married an Adventist minister, while the youngest is a fine Christian girl at home." Here the station was announced, at which the man had to get off. Father was in perplexity the rest of the way, for he felt he should go home. But somehow he did not gain the victory. Reuben was so homesick that Father had to let him go back home when he arrived at the station. He went back to his lonely abode by himself. At times he came home to get supplies, and Mother always gave him the best she had, asking him each time to come back. He seemed to be having a terrible battle within, but each time he returned to his lonely dwelling. Reuben told of Father's visit with the man on the train, but Father never mentioned it. Reuben's story gave us hope. We kept praying for Father, for we knew he wanted to do right and that he was lonely. One day, I received the following letter from him. Dear daughter, your letter of recent date was greatly appreciated. It had been over at Mother's house for a few days before I got it. I was laid up with a sore foot, so did not get over for my supplies on the day I usually do. I wish to thank you, my child, for the good wishes you expressed for me. I have only good wishes for my family. What shall I write to you? I am here all alone. Each day is the same. Each night I wet my pillow with tears. If the family would have stayed in the ways I taught them, then we would still be together, but they chose to be Adventists, so that fixed a great gulf between us. I have comfort in only one thing, and that is when I read God's Word. I read my Bible daily and weep often in my loneliness. I see now that my Bible was saved from the fire to bring comfort to me in this trying time. At times I am thankful that none of my family has chosen to walk the ways of the wicked, even if they have departed from the things I have taught them. I am casting all my burdens on the one who understands all. Greet your husband and the little ones. I commit you to God and his word. With love I remain, your father. I answered the letter at once and urged Father to return home. Mother needed him in her declining days, and he needed Mother. Further, I told him that none of us was against him, but that we were all for him. There is no gulf fixed between us from our side, and we are all praying that God will in some way bind us close together again and save us as an unbroken family, I wrote. One day, shortly after Father allowed Reuben to return home, Mother became very depressed. She tried to work, but somehow things did not move as they should. At noon, she said to the boys, "I'm uneasy about Father. I think we should quit work early so that we can drive over this evening and see how he is." She had washed and mended his clothes. By the time the boys came home, she had fixed up a big basket of food. After supper, 4 of them drove away to spend the evening with Father. Mother did not go along because she did not feel well enough to make the trip over the rough road through the woods. The boys arrived at Father's home before dusk. He had been lonely all day, he said, and was happy to see them. All evening they had a good visit together. Shortly after 11, Willie suggested, "Well, Father, I think we'd better go home." "Oh, this evening has slipped by fast," said Father. "I must not hold you any longer, but I do want to say a little more before you leave. You know I used to read everything that was sent me, which said anything against Seventh-day Adventists. But I gained nothing in doing so. The last 2 months I have read nothing but the Bible. I have found that Adventists are right after all. Christ did keep the Sabbath, and so did his disciples." Then he told of his visit with that unfortunate father on the train, and how he had begun to count his blessings after that. The boys began to sing softly. "When upon life's billows you are tempted and tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord hath done." Father tried to sing with him, but his voice broke and the tears came freely. As they sang the last stanzas softly, he began to sob. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged. God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend, help and comfort give you to the journey's end. For a moment all was silent. Then Father said, "I am sorry I opposed my family the way I have. I thought I was right, but I see I was wrong. I hope God will forgive me. I have made up my mind to sell my things and return home where I belong." Isn't that wonderful? My brothers tried to sing Father's favorite song, "Now take my hands and lead me," before they separated. But they were all very much touched by Father's confession. Father tried hard to sing, but his sobs and tears would not let him. As the boys started for home, he said once more, "I'm so glad you've come. Good night." The boys were happy for the good news they would be able to bring Mother. The car could not carry them home fast enough. As they were nearing home, they saw the light burning in the window. They knew Mother was waiting for their return and would be anxious to know how they had found Father. They drove in quietly, put the car in the garage, and then went to the house together. It was after midnight, but Mother was still waiting. When she saw the smiling faces of the boys, she said, "Tell me all about your visit and how you found Father." After they told her of Father's decision, she buried her face in her apron for a while and wept. Her heart was overflowing with joy. Finally, she said, "At last our prayers are answered. I'm so happy." Let's fix up everything the best way we know how, so that he will be happy when he comes." The boys said they were going to do all they could to make things pleasant for Father when he returned. Poor blind Lydia had been sound asleep, but was awakened by the conversation. Mother went to her bed and told her the good news. "Well, we'd all better get to bed now for a little rest, for we have work to do in the morning," Mother said, turning to the boys once more. "My heart is so filled with peace and joy that I cannot express it. I feel such rest, as though I were near God." Together they sung that comforting song Mother loved so well, "There is a place of quiet rest." And then they retired. Next morning, Father got up to attend to his morning's work. He had walked only a short distance from the house toward the barn when he fell to the ground. A neighbor who was coming by saw him fall and ran over to help, but Father was gone. Heart failure. This neighbor immediately sent word to Mother. The same boys who had had the pleasant visit with him the evening before drove over to bring the body home. Mother was prostrate with grief. A doctor was called, but his services were not needed. Father was laid in the family lot about a mile from home, where weeping willows shelter his grave, as they do baby brothers. Little had I thought when we said goodbye at the train that we were soon to lose him. Father has said his last goodbye and his last good night. Now we are waiting for his good morning on that bright resurrection day. Father was a good, honest man, always wanting to do right, but the enemy was fighting to gain his soul. The severe struggle began when years ago God's servant delivered to our home that book, Daniel and the Revelation, bearing the gospel message for the last days. Although Father consigned the book to the attic, believing that it taught heretical doctrines, seeds of truth had been sown in the hearts of his children. These seeds have brought forth an abundant harvest. While we are all sad that Father went the way he did, yet his last words have been a great comfort to us. For some time it seemed that the enemy would gain the victory in this long, hard conflict. But thanks be to God, after all the anxious years of praying and waiting, Father's prejudice was broken down, and peace came to his heart before his death. What a joy fills our hearts as we look beyond this cruel reign of sin and death and the grave to that blessed morning when all earthly trials shall be over, where none of our motives will be misunderstood, and where we shall again be united with loved ones and friends who have long been sleeping in their dusty graves. And that's the end of our book. It's a good story, wasn't it? And we all have this blessed hope. Maybe you have loved ones sleeping in their graves. Maybe you have loved ones that are close to death even now. So we can only trust in God that He is, that His promises are sure.